Welcome to Strata. I'm Glenn.
And I'm Brandon. Welcome to the Minds on Muscle podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Minds on Muscle podcast. I'm here with Glenn, and we have a superstar guest, Mr. Michael PETRELLA. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. How about the both of you?
We're doing good. I don't know, we will all know this, but we had some sound issues starting off, which was a little bit stressful on my end, but we're here now. We're having a good show. And so we're really excited. Michael, I've known you for a long time. In fact, actually, I don't think I've ever told you this, but before I opened this gym, I was watching lots of your content and looking at different machines that you'd been purchasing, and I didn't realize that you were relatively close to us. Is it Oakville that you're in?
We're in the town of Paris, which is kind of right between Brantford and Cambridge. So we're about half an hour from Oakville.
Fantastic. Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to have Michael on is, as many of you will know from listening to this show, Glenn and I are huge fans of the Nautilus machines, the Medics machines, the Arthur Jones Providence. And honestly, as much as we like to talk about it and some of us thinks that we know a lot about that stuff, we really know nothing in comparison to this gentleman right here. Michael, really, you have I believe, one of the largest collections of Nautilus machines I've ever seen in Canada, and you have an incredible success story of a personal training studio. If you don't mind, I would love to talk to you more about your history and how the heck you discovered this Arthur Jones CAM exercise machine world.
So it all started for me by reading an article that Mike Mentzer wrote actually about nutrition. And I think it was L. Darden who told me years later that he probably didn't even write it. It was ghostwritten for Mike. The funny thing was, it had nothing to do with training at all. But I believe somewhere in the article, he mentioned these Nautilus machines. And I forget if I did a Google search or how I kind of went down that rabbit hole. But I do remember it was one of Mike's articles that started it. And eventually when you read Mike, it turns into Arthur Jones, because, you know, Mike sounds a lot like Arthur Jones when he writes and when he speaks. And somewhere along the lines, I start reading about these Nautilus machines. And I don't remember exactly what article it was that got me to buy the first one, but the first two that I bought was a Nautilus pullover with the pull down, those double machines, and the double chest, which is the fly and the decline press, also from the same seat. The idea was I was going to use, I believe it was Mike Mentzer's heavy duty 2 routine. So his chest and back routine was the double chest, the double pullover, and if I'm not mistaken, it was a barbell deadlift. So I bought a barbell with, I think it was about 400 pounds worth of plates. And I was just going to do that routine in my parents' basement because I was young at the time. I didn't have my own place. And the rest of my split was going to be done at the local commercial gym where I had a membership. And when I first got on these pullovers and these double chest, I learned years later the model they used, which was Kim Wood, I believe is around 6'2". I'm 6'4". So these machines really fit me well. And I especially the pullover still to this day in several different incarnations is probably my favorite machine. And it was just a really nice feeling. And I enjoyed more than I thought training by myself in the basement. Now, I did have some friends and some training partners. When I say by myself, I mean not having to go to a membership gym, not having to fight for a machine. So the experience of having my own space where I could train and having these machines, which I really enjoyed, just kind of started everything from there. And that turned into, well, if I just get a couple more machines, I can do my leg day here. And then, well, if I get an arm machine, maybe a shoulder machine, I can do everything. And what really got me into the commercial gym game was I had made a circuit that I wanted to buy for myself. And the last 2 machines that I wanted was the Nautilus hip and back and a Nautilus leg curl. And that was going to be it. That was going to be the end of my collection. That was going to be the end of my buying equipment. And what ended up happening was a YMCA in Tulsa, Oklahoma, sold all their Nautilus machines, and I think they just upgraded to newer ones. And I believe it was some sort of reseller that got their hands on them. And they had the 2 that I wanted in the circuit, but that circuit had 14 pieces. And I contacted them trying to buy the 2 that I wanted. And they said, well, for the price, you might as well take them all. And the price of what I had been paying for a machine, in this case, I wanted 2, was the price of the whole circuit. I think it was about $1,000 for 14 machines. It was an absurd deal for the time.
That's amazing.
So I bought them, didn't have the space to put them. Didn't know how I was going to ship them, but I just knew it was a good deal and I was going to figure it out. While they were getting shipped, I made friends with a guy and told him this story, and he thought it was the funniest thing. And he had a factory. And he said, if you put them in my factory, the 12 that you don't need, and train me on them a couple times a week, you can store them there for free. And that's quite literally how the commercial gym started. So I had my circuit in my parents' basement, and then I had another circuit at this factory in Cambridge. And he already had a bit of a gym set up, and then I just kind of added to it. There was an adjacent room that was full of crap. I think I put the picture on my social media once or twice. I'm talking 6 feet high, about 1,800 square feet, full of junk. I approached him about if I cleaned it, could I use it? And he said, yeah. And it took us months to clean it. It was all on a second floor, and we were just taking load after load down the stairs. And once we cleaned it all up, I moved both circuits into there, and that was the first commercial gym that we had. And it just started because I bought a circuit of equipment, not knowing where to put it, not knowing what I was going to do with it. I mean, I didn't know it was going to sit in my driveway, which wasn't even my driveway, but I knew it was a good deal, and I just went ahead with it.
Dude, that's an amazing origin story. Now, first and foremost, like right at the very beginning, you bought the double chest and the double back for your parents' basement?
Yes.
So anybody who's ever seen that chest machine is enormous. Like for your parents' basement to sneak that down there, that's very generous of them to let you sneak that down there.
I don't think they knew what they were getting into. I had measured my parents' basement several times, and they had a drop ceiling. And I figured out on the pullover, there's a cam and a sprocket that sits on the pull down side. That's the highest spot. And I got a couple of measurements from Bill Casto, who was the broker at the time. And I figured out that if I took out sections of the drop ceiling and I put that cam, the sprocket between the joists, it would fit, which it did. So when they showed up, we went down with a 26-foot straight truck to pick them up in Rochester, New York. And when I got them home, I remember my dad said, "You're never going to get those in the basement." I said, no, I measured it. It's going to work. And sure enough, we got it in. And little did I know, but still to this day, we have well over 100 pieces now. That Nautilus double chest is still the hardest machine to move out of all of them.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Did I hear 100 pieces?
Yeah, we're over 100 now at the facility, the main facility.
Listen, that is impressive for any gym. I don't care where you're at. I'm a little curious, Michael. Why are Nautilus machines and Med-X such amazing piece of equipment? What sets them apart, do you think, from other brands like Lifetime Fitness or Cybex or any of the other brands that are out there?
Arthur was famous for saying that function dictates design. So when I go back to the original Nautilus, what I really enjoy about them was if you were to try to build some of these machines now, for those that aren't familiar, they made 5 double machines. So it's a machine where it has an isolation movement and a compound movement from the same seat. The biggest and baddest one is the leg extension into the leg press. When I asked my Med-X rep at the time why Med-X didn't make something that was equivalent, he said that to make that machine as it sat today with current labor and steel prices, and this was 3 or 4 years ago, so it's probably even more as we do this podcast, it would have been $20,000 US. And you can routinely get them on the used market, between $1,000 and $1,500. So it's almost impossible to recreate what they were going for at the time, was trying to make a better tool. Labor and steel is just so expensive now that it's almost impossible to make it work and turn a profit. If you look at a machine like an X-Force machine, which I think is probably the next, I'm going to say maybe evolution, or at least the next thing that someone really smart was trying to build a better tool. 5-6 years ago, they were 10,000 US, and then you had to ship them from Sweden. It's very, very difficult to come up with that kind of capital for most gyms, and most of your clients aren't going to appreciate anyway. So it's not even a really great business model. So going back to the Nautilus, we had a time period where we could build arguably a better tool. I know obviously there's a lot of people out there that are still in love with the barbell, and I don't get into that debate too much. But they were trying to build a better tool. Function dictates design. And then when you get into the Med-X equipment, he was really, when I say he, Arthur and his staff, guys like Phil Stencil, they were trying to build a machine that the biomechanics were really well thought out. It was going to be really safe for the general public. Not to say that a bodybuilder can't use it, but they were thinking more about people with orthopedic concerns. So when you use a MedX machine, you have fantastic biomechanics. They have weight stacks that don't move as far as the movement arm does. And again, that's to try to eliminate impact forces on the joints. And again, you're looking at someone or a company trying to build a better tool based around how the human body works, and not trying to do it the other way around. Again, I'm 6'4". If you were to watch me barbell squat, it's not a great sight. Even with just the bar, I'm very long in the femur and it pitches me over. And it's not a mobility issue. It's not an injury issue. That's just what my leverages are. So I can use a barbell and I can make it work for me. But a lot of times I have to modify things greatly. Whereas with some of these other tools, some of these other machines, I can take a lot of those problems out and I can get down to the actual resistance and to the actual workout. So for me, it works great. And then obviously when you're training clients, you'll find that almost every single one of them has an injury somewhere, whether it's current or whether it's in the past. And the more high-end tools you have, the easier it is to work around it or work with it.
You know, it's interesting because I feel like the amount of people that exercise that would really appreciate what Nautilus and MedX was trying to do is so few. Even among people that appreciate exercise and like going to exercise on a regular basis, it's like you said before, so many people are just so infatuated with the barbell and that whole culture that surrounds that on Instagram and social media that you actually, it's a great follow-up question. How many people, when they come in and they see these older pieces of equipment that we know are fantastically designed, how many of them get really excited about it versus how many are just like, I've never seen that before, that intimidates me, or I don't get the benefit, let me just go squat over here by the squat rack?
Certainly when people walk into our current location, we have, again, quite a few pieces, old and new. And we do have to address the intimidation factor because it can be a bit overwhelming. Well, I find that most of the people don't care about the equipment. They don't really know what it is. So I don't use it as a selling feature. However, once you get somebody on the equipment and on higher end equipment, even without an understanding of biomechanics, even without having an exercise passion, they can get on it and they can feel the difference. And they do a hard set. And it's, oh, I've never felt this muscle before, which obviously they felt that muscle before, but that's something we hear a lot of. And after one or two workouts, they can appreciate the difference, at least on some sort of intrinsic level, without understanding all the nuts and bolts and biomechanics and everything that went into it. That's more something like us geek out on. But I do feel that once people feel it, again, on some level, it's there for them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's funny. I mean, a lot of the machines that you have, like the older gen Nautilus and the MedX machines, I mean, those are terrifying looking machines. They are boxy and sharp and aggressive looking. But as soon as you put someone on like the pull down or the pull over or any of those machines and they feel just like one or two reps, it is so intuitive and so instinctive and so natural feeling that how it looks versus how it feels instantly just dissuades that. And it becomes like a part of how they need to exercise. Because when they go back to a traditional gym, it's not even close to the same. It pales in comparison.
I know also at Strata, you guys run the Strive machines, and we got one of them on our floor as well. And what I find really interesting about that line, they have obviously the adjustable cam, so you can play around with the strength curve. So we have the Strive ab machine, and I think it has 9 different settings. Mm-hmm. And I understand that their protocol is they want you to do multiple sets in different cam settings and get different feels. I get all that. But I would say that if you got on a Strive ab machine and you set the cam one way, so it's very hard to start and then lessens off as you continue into the motion, that machine, at least in my opinion, and several of my trainers we played around with it, it feels horrible. It's almost a throwaway machine. But then when you adjust the cam so it starts easy and gradually ramps up, I think it's about 30% more resistance, and you're really working hard to have that contraction, it becomes an excellent machine. Again, at least in my opinion. So it's interesting how much of an effect a cam can have on a machine, all other things being equal, weight stack being equal, seat being equal. So these machines that have cams, whether it be MedX, whether it be Nautilus, whether it be Strive, there's a few others that use it. At least there's an engineer somewhere thinking about how to make this feel right. And I've used machines that just have circular pulleys, and some of them, they're great. And whether they got it right by accident or it just doesn't need a cam, that's great. But I find that when you see these machines where obviously an engineer, or even a lot of the 90s pieces, which as much as I enjoyed the stuff of the 70s, I think some of the stuff in the 90s might have been the golden age of building exercise equipment, because you had so many brands coming into the market. There was somebody sitting down thinking, okay, how can I make this better? How can I make the knee line up the right way? How can I make sure that the shoulder's not impinging on this? And unfortunately, we've been left mostly in the last 10 or 15 years with brands that are very shiny. They're not particularly well made. Most of their stuff is coming out of China, so they can mass produce it quite a bit cheaper. And they're just putting it into a big box gym. And I don't feel there's any benefit to using them over a simple barbell or dumbbell. But there have been quite a few manufacturers and quite a few builders over the last 30 or 40 years that have really put some time and effort into making great tools. And if you're lucky enough to have access to them, you certainly should.
Yeah, I think Prime is one of the current machine companies I see doing some innovative stuff, and they got some cool things, even though they just took the Strive patents and put it in there and started playing around with it a little bit. But I couldn't agree more. I mean, a good friend of mine met with one of the engineers at a large company. I'll leave it unnamed for now. And he was talking to them about their line of equipment. And the engineer took them straight towards the cardio equipment and started talking about the elliptical and the bike and stuff. And he goes, that's cool. I want to look at these strength machines. And he goes, oh, don't worry about that. We just make them to go with the cardio machines. So when a gym buys this many cardio machines, we throw in a line of this. And it was just like a throwaway thing. I'll tell you about who it was later. But it just blew my mind that it was just such a throwaway. I think, like you said, and like Glenn said, like, it's disappointing because the opportunity for awesome biomechanics and controlled scenarios to help people with injuries is there. And it's just not as popular as the attractiveness of the barbell it is nowadays. I've seen now from some of your content, I do see you've got some powerlifting things going on within your spot doing barbell stuff. I don't mind if you don't mind me asking, how do you mix the combination of like barbell work with athletes who are working towards doing those specific activities with the strength machine stuff?
So when we were running the powerlifting team, I don't do it as much anymore. I just don't have the time. We're more on the medical end of things now. But when we were doing the team full tilt, obviously they were spending a good amount of time with the barbell, because like any sport, they have to practice what they're doing. And in the sport of powerlifting, you have 3 lifts and you need to be very proficient at all 3. So once we would do those lifts, and we would normally do some low rep stuff because they have to be good at it. And we would normally do something in the 8 to 12 range just to build that fatigue and that overload. And again, give them more practice with the bar. A lot of the accessory work that came after would come on, in my opinion, better tools that we had at the gym. And not to backtrack, but I remember talking to Jim Flanagan years ago, who worked for Nautilus Medics for, I believe, over 30 years. He was told by Arthur Jones that the definition of exercise was fundamentally wrong. And I happen to agree with this statement, that exercise should be defined as movement against resistance. That's it. And I do believe it can be distilled down to that. So if we, at least for a second, work on that premise that that's the definition of exercise, then the quality of the exercise is ultimately determined by the quality of the resistance. And if we can give somebody resistance that is biomechanically friendly over an appropriate range of motion, and in barbells, a lot of times it's a limited range of motion, and then we can alter that resistance curve to match the output of the muscle, or at least as close to as we can, then ultimately we're providing better, more efficient, more effective, hopefully, exercise. And to get back to that company who said that they're using their cardio devices as their main selling point, and the strength training or the resistance machines as their throwaway, if you were to look at any sort of typical steady state cardio machine, whether it be an elliptical or a bike or a treadmill, generally you are, yes, you're working against resistance, but the resistance in most cases is limited. It's also through a limited range of motion. And without getting into the aerobic versus anaerobic equation of this argument, it's lesser exercise, period. It's easier. It's not harder. And again, in a lot of cases, we're putting impact forces on the joints that are less than desirable. So I'm not trying to tell people to get off all cardio devices and sit on their couch unless they have an absolute perfect exercise machine. But let's be very clear. that those should be the throwaway devices or the things that you get for the people who are less educated, and getting people onto properly designed exercise machines and working them hard and intensely is by far the better form of exercise. At least that's what I believe.
I couldn't agree more. I do have a question, and I know, Glenn, you've been biting at something, so I'll come back to you. But you said something I thought was really interesting, which is the idea of the properties of resistance. And I love it because you can see through the different generations of Nautilus to MedX machines how they had to modify how they were creating resistance profiles and resistance curves for the individual. Like if I think of the first gen Nautilus machine that had this huge cam ratio between the resistance to the effort, and it was like a 6-to-1, and it had a doubler pulley on it that made it like insanely heavy. So it only had a few different plates. Although the resistance shipping costs was super low because they had to send a lot of plates, the jumps in resistance was like 120 to 240 pounds. It was insane. Even to the second gen, they figured out that that wasn't going to work. So they put more plates on there and took the doubler pulley away. And then if you look towards, I don't know if you have one of the MedX ones, but I saw the Delphex version of the same shrug machine that took some of the friction reducing technology that MedX used and had the exact same shape of machine. But you could see that between each generation, the pad input and the actual setup was very similar, but how the resistance changed over time allowed it to evolve, which I think is really cool to see that, you know, they had great ideas and they learned from their mistakes, so to speak, or the implications of what they did before and actually grew. It was really, really cool. Do you have one of those MedX shrug machines or the Delphex one?
To my knowledge, the only MedX shrug machine in all of Canada is with Andre in Toronto at his gym. I think he might have the only Delphex machines in the whole country. So I've gone to his place and I've used them.
Yeah.
I have the first gen shrug that I kind of keep for myself. It's not actually on my main floor because, as you alluded to, it's very difficult for most people to do. And then I had the second gen one. I forget who I sold it to. It's just very uncomfortable on most people's forearms, unfortunately. For those who don't know, it's basically a gripless shrug machine. And in theory, it's a great idea that you don't have to hold on to the weight, so the grip isn't the limiting factor. But in practice, you get someone who's even a little bit strong, and those pads really dig into the forearms. But I like what you said, that they were constantly trying to make things better. And on some of the machines, I think the aggressive cam is warranted, and I think it makes the exercise harder and then hopefully more productive. And on other exercises, I think they definitely made them more passive. And something like some of the MedX machines, I think they might even went too passive, where at the very top of the range, it kind of falls off completely. And I think some of the best machines out there, the resistance curve isn't flat in the sense that it stays constant the whole time, but they're trying to line it up against the muscular output, and they just happen to hit it right on the mark. And I find that those machines are the ones that in the aftermarket, people are really looking for, and they become sought out. And when they hit the market, they get bought up really quick. And I find that they get a reputation fast. All of a sudden, you're looking for whatever brand chest press, and you can never get it because anytime it comes up, everyone who knows their stuff, and there's a bunch of people out there who do, they're just snatching them up.
I got to say first, this conversation is making me excited to work out this podcast. So thank you very much, Michael, for bringing that on here. When Brandon told me we're having you on the podcast, I obviously did the thing that anyone would do, which is Google and watch a whole bunch of videos and get to know this man we're going to be interviewing. And I am enamored with the Colorado experiment. In my younger years, I had looked at it myself before and was trying to think about it. I know Tim Ferriss in his book, The 4-Hour Body, alludes to something similar, but you actually went in and replicated the Colorado experiment. I'm just kind of curious why you went out and did that and what you found from your study.
We'd wanted to do it for a couple of years. To our knowledge, we're the only gym in the world that has all of the pieces that would be necessary to replicate it as close to verbatim as possible. The one squat machine that they used, it was a one-off. It had been scrapped, 30, 40 years ago. So we ended up using the Nautilus dual squat, which would have been similar in terms of cam profile. But outside of that, they're almost identical machines. And obviously it's legendary. Casey put on all the weight that he did, and we actually did a TV show on it. And most people know that he was regaining the weight. Most people know that he had used steroids at least at some point before. Whether he used them during is very hotly debated. In fact, what we've been finding is we just did this for ourselves as something that we wanted to do because we were told the gym was going to get shut down for a month. It took a month to do the experiment. So now we got at least something to focus our time and attention on. When we put the results up, there was a lot of people who were very supportive, which is great. But obviously, there's a lot of people that wanted to step all over it too. And my response to them is just go out and try it, see if it works for you. It did for us. But where I'm going with this is it was very, very hard. It was more difficult than I thought it was going to be. And I've trained what I believe to be fairly intensely for some time. And whether it was just the very heavy emphasis on the negative training, which we do a little bit of here, but I hadn't done a lot of previous to, or just the idea that we were trying to replicate something that had historical significance to the fitness industry and we wanted to do it justice. It was something that I kind of look at it, my Army friends and my Army clients, that when they did basic training, they can look back at it now and say, oh yeah, that was great. Those were the good old days. But when they were doing the basic training, it was probably awful. And when the Colorado experiment was over for us, I looked at the two guys I did it with and I was like, I never want to do that again. I don't care that we got results. It was just hard. So for the people that supported it, it's very nice, and we hope that it brings something of positive to their training. And for the people who don't support it, go try it. It's only gonna cost you a month of your life. Go try it out. And I think you're going to be surprised at how intense it is, and what you're going to have to do to get through it. Because the one thing that we noted the entire time, had we been working our normal jobs and had we had our normal responsibilities, at least at my age, which is mid-30s, I don't believe I could have gotten through it. So it is partially due to the circumstances at the time, just having that time off. And the biggest logistical problem, which I've talked about online, is you're going to need 2 or maybe 3 really good, really strong spotters, because some of the weight that they can lift to you so you can lower it, it's heavy. And I mean, I'm somewhat strong, but there's all kinds of people in this world way stronger than I am. And they're going to lift weights that exceed mine greatly. You're going to need some friends to help you out, because you just simply cannot do the experiment without those people. And if you had 4 spotters and you set up a gym session, only 2 of them showed up, well, you might not be able to do that workout. That's how crazy it can get.
I mean, if you don't mind me asking, and obviously I wouldn't ask you to name every single exercise, but could you give the people listening, in case they're unfamiliar with what the protocol was, could you just give them a general idea of how it was set up?
Yep. So every workout, and there was 14 workouts done over a month. So you're basically training every other day. They're full body. They are all done on Nautilus machines. I believe there's 12 or 14 machines that you would need to replicate it. And in the first workout, you started with legs and then worked from like the biggest, strongest musculature and going down. So legs, upper back, chest, and moving from there. After, I believe, the first workout, they did legs at the end. I'm not sure why they decided to do it, but that is what they did. And near the end, legs became very almost like an afterthought. There's a lot of workouts where you did one set of dual squat and that was it. You do 8 to 9 exercises for the upper body. So a typical routine looked something like negative only pullover, the negative only pull down, negative only chest press, negative only shoulder press, negative only bicep curls, negative only tricep extensions. A lot of times they would throw in a positive bicep curl on a different machine, and then maybe a positive lateral raise, that would be your upper body, and then some sort of leg extension, leg curl, and leg press. Or near the end, it just went to the leg press. A lot of the lower body stuff was negative accentuated, because if you were to look at a leg press, it's very difficult to get somebody to even lift the resistance to you. So you would lift with 2 legs and lower with 1, which was a lot easier. You don't really need partners for that. So that would be the typical work. And that doesn't sound like a lot of exercise, and it certainly isn't a lot of volume. But with every set being, about 40% more than what you can lift for good positive repetitions, the weights got heavy relative to the person who was lifting it, and it was taking a beating out of all of us. But the interesting thing, and we've noted this as well, our joints felt great for how heavy the resistance was, the biomechanics on the machine, and generally the slower cadences used on the negatives. We really didn't experience any joint pain throughout the experience. I remember my shoulders being a little bit tight from all the the negative chest press, negative shoulder press, the lateral raise. They were taking a beating, but there wasn't any sort of impingement or any pain. So we actually enjoyed the feeling of how the body was during the experiment. But I mean, you were tired all the time. We were sleeping and eating as much as we could just to get through to the next workout.
Those Omni machines are absolutely incredible. I remember before you picked up the first one, looking at pictures of them years ago and how intense they look. Like just the photography they have of Casey and Arthur I think it was Casey, the photo, doing, I think, the shoulder press, and just him holding his arms up with his legs out in front. Like, they're the most incredible looking machines. And 100%, if they manufactured enough of them, I would for sure have a U set. But did you say you have the only full set of the Omni machines, the eccentric only machines in Canada or in the world? Or
So I know there's at least one other gym in the States that has the 5 Omni machines as a set. As for having all four, there's 12 or 14 machines that I have to look it back up to do the entire experiment. We believe we're the only gym that has all of them. I mean, you never know who's out there, who's got what in their garage or their barn somewhere. But at least as far as you can go online, you can search it out. We believe we're the only gym.
now, the X Factor machines that you referenced near the beginning of the conversation, I'm not sure if you've seen those, but those are the machines you're talking about with the oscillating weight stack, where the weight stack shifts over to the side to decrease the amount of resistance and then shifts back so you're getting more. Are those the machines you meant?
Yes, they're made in Sweden. I used them down at Roger Schwab's facility, which at the time was Mainline. He sold that and bought, I believe, 2 circuits of it, and that's what he's got in his X Force Philadelphia a facility, which I haven't been down to yet because of the travel restrictions. But as soon as we can cross the border, that's right on my top of my list of places to go and things to do.
That's amazing. So I got 2 questions for you. One is quick because I just don't know. What is the mechanism that they use for the oscillation of the weight stack to get more weight on the eccentric? And do you think someone could sufficiently do a version of the Colorado experiment on those machines?
So I haven't spent a lot of time with the X Force machines. I haven't pulled one apart and put it back together. But as far as I understand it, they use an electric motor that when you are lifting the resistance, the weight stack is on roughly a 45-degree angle. So think of it like a 45-degree leg press. That's why you can load all those plates onto it, because the effective resistance is cut in half compared to a vertical leg press. That's why you might see someone do 1,000 pounds on a leg press, but they're probably not going to be able to squat 500. So I think it's all done through, I know you have to plug them into the wall, so I'm pretty sure it's all just electric motors. As for recreating the experiment, I think you could create a similar inroad. So I think the results would probably be similar. To get the same feel, though, those machines are very cool that you still do the positive on every repetition. You're just not underloaded on the negative. Whereas what we did for a lot of our sets, the positive was omitted and you were only doing the negative. So I don't think one would produce better results over the other, but it would be a bit of a different feel between the 2 technologies.
Fair enough.
The things that people come up with in this little thing we call the exercise is absolutely amazing. I mean, I don't know nearly as much as you two do about the mechanics of all these different machines, but I'm blown away that we're at this spot with exercise and health where people have put this much time and effort into thinking about it and coming up with novel ways, not just novel ways, but novel, intelligent ways to challenge the human body. I love it. I love it.
And Michael, everyone who's listening to this, if you want to check out the Colorado experiment, I know that you published it you got it published on T Nation, and is it on your website as well?
No, we just put it on Facebook. If you just search for STG Strength and Power, Michael Petrella, it should come up. Yeah, someone posted it on T Nation, and some people supported, some people didn't. A lot of people were upset with our before and after photos, and I just tried to explain to them that, look, we just took them on our cell phones before the first workout and before the last workout, and I mean, even the one guy commented that, well, they're wearing the same underwear and the same ones. Like, yeah, well, we tried to make it as similar as we could. We used the same backdrop, but they said that in one, the guy was flexing or he was more angry looking. And I got no problem admitting they're not perfect. And what I just tell people, and this is the truth, we had done 2 other case studies before the Colorado experiment. One of them was involving and increasing a volume over a 5-week period, then decreasing it back down and doing it again for their 5-week period. And the other one had to do with a lot of high rep training and occlusion training together. And I think that one was 8 weeks. So for both of those case studies, we took before and after photos. And unfortunately for us, we didn't have a whole lot to show for it. So when we did the Colorado experiment, we didn't really know what to expect. Now, if someone had told me that in 30 days, you're going to be 15 pounds heavier with almost the same waist, we probably would have got someone professional to come in and document it a little bit better. But because we had 2 failed attempts, I won't say failed, we learned stuff, but 2 attempts where we didn't get the results we were hoping for. When it came to the third one, we weren't really expecting anything special. So yeah, if I could do it over again, we probably get a little bit more standardized photos. But even if you want to take the photos out of it, we have all the circumference measurements. We have all the weight measurements that were done on a medical scale, and the results are there. So we're happy with it. And that's basically all it comes down to.
Yeah, it's really amazing what happens when you train really hard and you have your nutrition and sleep match that, the kind of results that people can get. And I would just put it out there. I think most people training for hypertrophy, and that's what the idea behind the Colorado experiment was, most people training for hypertrophy aren't probably going to be creating enough of an inroads for the growth that they want. And they're probably not eating or sleeping as much as they ought to be unless they're professional bodybuilders. I mean, that would be one of my general thoughts about it. I don't know if you agree or not, Michael.
I do agree with that. And I was talking to another colleague about it recently. And certainly we were sleeping more than normal because of the lockdown. And with the eating, it was really nice because instead of me scheduling meals around clients and around my typical schedule, if I was hungry, I was just able to eat. My fridge was right there. The difference that I try to get through to people, and it's hard to get people to understand, I guess, unless they've gone through a similar process themselves. Whereas on the other experiments, we were eating very similar. And the amount of food and the type of food that I've been eating has been fairly unchanged for a number of years now. When I was doing that particular experiment, I felt like I had to eat. Whereas when I was doing some of the other experiments, I was somewhat force feeding myself, saying, okay, this is the amount of calories I need to get in a day. It's the end of the day. I'm not really hungry for them, but I'm going to do it because, you're trying to keep things as equal as you can. Whereas when it came to at least this particular protocol we were using, I was eating all the time and I was hungry to eat. There was not one meal that I can remember during that month where I felt like I had to force feed myself to eat.
And if I'm not mistaken, Michael, the protocol was like 1 set to complete failure. Is that what I understand? Or am I mistaken? I don't think we talked about set rep schemes, and most people listening are probably going to be curious about that.
Every exercise was done for 1 set. Now, when most people think of failure, they think of concentric failure, or the point where you cannot lift the resistance for 1 more good repetition. In most of these exercises, we were doing negative only. So we were utilizing a resistance that we couldn't lift for maybe anything more than 1 or 2 repetitions. So we were in many cases going to negative failure to the point that we couldn't even lower the resistance anymore. And the first couple of workouts, we would pretty much terminate a set when we couldn't lower it, maybe within about 3-4 seconds. So we might have had 1 or 2 more negatives in us. And that's what the protocol for negative only training has been for a number of years, because you don't want that weight to just fall down on you. But as we got more comfortable with the experiment and got more comfortable with the spotters that we were using, we were going to negative failure, where basically we had a pretty good idea when that weight was going to drop and someone was almost catching it. Now on the Nautilus machines, you can't get pinned down like you could with a barbell. If you were doing negative only chest pressing with a barbell, at the very least, I'd say have some safeties set up, because you don't want that weight to come crashing down. But we were going to negative failure for the majority of the exercises. So that inroad was very great. More so than just going to concentric failure. And like you said, everything was for 1 set, 1 all-out set.
I have a totally different question I want to ask you. I want to have some fun because I feel like we've been just chewing your brain for info. Was Arthur nuts?
He was a genius.
Yeah.
I'll say that much. Um, and when you think about some of the machines that he designed, that he essentially just pulled out of thin air, and the majority of the machines on the market today, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise, are in a lot of cases just some sort of copy on what he came up with. And even when people like to discredit the Colorado experiment and they say all these things that Casey did, oh, they dieted him down, oh, they just force fed him, oh, it was him regaining previous muscle. Those are all true statements. But I challenge people to find something in writing before 1973 where a lot of people were talking about this. We can look at through the scope of 2021 and say this is more known stuff. But back then, bodybuilding is largely a subculture. And I'm not saying there wasn't a bodybuilder hanging around the 40s who didn't know this stuff, but a lot of it was just not talked about. So even with what he did, I feel it was far ahead of where the industry was. And we're just kind of nitpicking it from today's point of view. As for how nuts he was, I mean, we've heard the stories of him pistol whipping people, and we've heard some of his lifestyle choices. And if you ever read his autobiography, it's a crude read. It's interesting, but it's certainly it's not going to make a lot of people like him. But the interesting thing I find about Arthur, I never had the chance to meet him. I was kind of coming into the industry when he was already retired and passed away. A lot of the people who knew him well had very unique relationships with him. Everything from him being a father figure to a mentor. If you were in his inner circle, those people, for the most part, have some very fond things to say about him, even when he was mean to them, and even some of the things that I can't say online that they said to him. Again, sometimes when we look back at those situations, maybe we see him through a bit of a tinted lens. But the people who are close to them, they all respected him. They all respected his intellect, and I believe they all respected what he brought to the fitness industry. And I believe, especially if you look into the Muscle, Smoke, and Mirrors, the books that Randy Roach wrote in volume 2, I believe it is, Arthur is mentioned a lot. And I talked to him when he was writing those books, and he kept saying that it wasn't really his intention to make Arthur such a center point in those books. But when you think about all the things that are now in the fitness industry, people going to the gym to strength train, in a lot of ways, Nautilus made that accessible. Before Nautilus, the barbell bodybuilding subculture, and it was a subculture, it was very few people. When they talk about when Arnold was at his best, I think it was in the beginning of Pump and Iron, talking about him being the king of 500 people. That's probably what it was. For maybe for all of the U.S., there was only a few hundred people that really cared. And when the Nautilus machine and the more modern fitness club comes out, that's when people really start getting into strength training. And I think Nautilus can really be believed, or can be looked at as the catalyst for all of that. And most people who go to the gym to strength train have probably never heard of Arthur Jones, but there's a good possibility that the reason that they're there is because of something that he wrote or something that he invented. And although he's a controversial figure, and a lot of people like to nitpick some of the stuff that he wrote 40 plus years ago, I still think there is nobody who was more pivotal in bringing strength training and exercise to the masses than he was.
Michael, that was a wonderful homage to the late, great Arthur Jones for sure.
I have one last question for you, because we should put a button on it today. What is your favorite machine?
Probably the original plate-loaded Nautilus pullover. It's a little wide for some people. It fits me quite well, but there's only been about 3 or 4 machines that I've ever purchased that I thought that was just so good that it allowed you to work so hard without having to worry about your joints, that it put on muscle and strength at a rate greater than I could with a more conventional tool. And for me, the Nautilus pullover would be one of those 4 or 5 machines.
It's so wonderfully refreshing to hear someone like yourself talk about how These machines are so beautifully constructed that it puts on muscle but makes the joints feel good. I feel like I don't hear that enough from enough exercisers talking about how good a machine feels on the joints. It's usually just I crushed the set, got all my reps in today, bro. It's never I love this machine because of how beautifully it is designed. And I'm glad to meet someone else like yourself who is just so passionate about that. So thanks for coming on today, Mike. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you guys spending the time, and hope everything's going great up your way up at Strata there, and we'll touch base soon.
Absolutely, Michael. And before you go, do you mind telling everybody where they can find you if they want to check out some cool images of the best machines in the world?
Anything STG Strength and Power, Google, Facebook, Instagram, it'll all come back to me. And I hope everyone enjoys it. If they have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks so much for coming on. It was a lot of fun having you today.
Thank you.